Talos mastered the power of the voice, and with it he united the lands of men into a great empire. There are those who would silence the dragon's truth, but not I.
Never in all the ages of Murren Man had Alinor fallen to invaders. The Somerset Isles were impregnable. The vile slugfolk had tried, unleashing their profane necromantic magics from the shallows. And while they visited unspeakable horrors upon the High Elves, they always slunk back into the murky depths. The Malma Sea Elves too had pillaged the coastline and raided every bay and cove across the circumference of the province. Their spiteful tenacity had almost paid off, for it seemed they existed on Nirn solely as the bane of the Ultima. But when they came close, the Psijic sent a storm to obliterate their fleet of wooden serpents. Eons of anguish at the hands of their aquatic rivals had made the Ultima the masters of the sea. They sailed ships of crystal and solidified sunlight, with wings though they do not fly, and prows that elongate into swirling sunbirds, and gem-encrusted mini trebuchets fit for sailing, which fire pure etheric fire, and banners, banners, banners listing their ancestors all the way back to the dawn. The mighty Riemann Cyrodiil, light of man, had turned to diplomacy rather than wage war against the Isles. It was in recalling these high elven triumphs, even those that had yet to occur, that the soldier atop the ramparts felt a wave of renewed vigour wash over him. Rumours of Talos Stormcrown's impending invasion had refracted around the crystal maze of the capital for days, but one look at Alinor's dazzling beauty demonstrated to all Ultima the defensive prowess of the Dominion. To outsiders it was far too bright, but to the inhabitants it showed that even the most delicate of structures could stand for eternity, if its protectors were backed by the gods. An ambassador of the Riemann Empire had described Alinor as made from glass or insect wings. Other humans had marvelled at the city's glimmering symmetry. One such account details Alinor as a hypnotic swirl of ramparts and impossibly high towers, designed to catch the light of the sun and break it to its component colours, which lie draped across its stones until you're thankful for nightfall. The pocket guide to the Empire could be obtained in Somerset, though it was categorised under comedy. These humans had only been permitted into Alinor's ports, yet the pride of man, and of their infallible leader, led them to boast about the incorporation of the Isles into the Empire. The soldier caught his smiling reflection in the milky sheen of the parapet. Carven from malachite, infused with moonstone, even their defences were a thing of beauty. And then, in an instant, as he looked into the eye of his glassy green-tinged echo, a crack split his visage, warping his face, snapping his smirk into a slanted scowl. The soldier cast his gaze above the battlements, across the tranquil, undulating sea of pearls. He refused to believe what he saw. Cresting the horizon was a lone figure. No ships, just a shining giant of brass, wading the depths of the Elferic Ocean as though it were a puddle. The city of glass trembled with every torrential footfall. Angelic Alinor, a metropolis fit to house the Eagle King and his Adric apostles. It had stood unchallenged since the beginning of recorded history, growing taller with every century. Many believed the towers would keep rising until they reached Ephirius. But Tiber Septim had come, and millennia of Altmeri architectural advancement seemed ready to collapse. The soldier stood resolute, ready to fight for his fragile home, but there wasn't going to be a siege. Could a man besiege an anthill when one indifferent kick could send it scattering, shattering? Talos came alone to Alinor, accompanied only by his 1,000-foot-tall automaton. Tidal waves heralded the arrival of his brass god, and the defenders on the walls were swept away. The impenetrable Isles capitulated after one bloody hour. The walking star humbled the haughty High Elves, and answered their architectural achievements with unfettered annihilation. And those who lived to speak of the siege of Alinor never did, for some subjects are too sickening to be spoken aloud. To think, the mighty Talos, Tiber Septim, became a Tamrielic legend, his ascension to godhood espoused by many to be the divine reward for his heroism. If you were a citizen of the Empire in the midst of the Tiber Wars, you would have surely been enraptured by his powerful presence and his military might. Even the Greybeards proclaimed his preeminence. They said he would go south, defeat the elves, and rule a united Tamriel, bringing the land of Dawn's beauty into a glorious golden age. The recorded histories, especially in provinces with substantial imperial influence, shield the masses from the colourful truth, displaying history in black and white, ink on parchment. Tiber Septim was a great man, a unifier, so his legacy would be one of heroism. But, outside of the Empire's reach, on the fringes of human colonial dominance, the elves don't see a hero, they see a merciless, avaricious tyrant. If your takeaway from the Tiber Wars was that Tiber Septim valiantly united the continent and commenced a utopian Septim Empire, then it may be time to look a little deeper. You may have seen my controversial video decrying Talos as a fraud, and if you haven't, I highly recommend giving it a gander. I'll leave a link for it in the description below. But in this video, I want to go over the crucial latter stages of the Tiber Wars in detail, his profane weapon of mass destruction, and draw attention to a particular catastrophic event that somehow never gets spoken about. By the end of the video, you may just be a bit more sympathetic to the old Merry Dominion. The Siege of Alinor is a peculiar event because it is simultaneously unheard of and extremely consequential, a forgotten turning point in Tamrielic history. It was in the wake of this siege that the Septim Empire reached unrivaled supremacy, and the Second Era gave way to the Third. Due to the imperial skew in historical records, a great deal of what we know about the siege comes from controversial fringe sources, and beyond that, most of what we know derives from extra-canon texts. But there is still plenty of canon lore to talk about. Before doing so, let's talk about the build-up to this event, the Tiber Wars. Maybe you know him as Hjalti Earlybeard, the promising young Breton warrior, or Talos of Atmora. Maybe you know him as the survivor of the Nightblade assassination attempt, or the scheming usurper of Cuhlakain's throne. Maybe both are true simultaneously in the winding, bending, breaking course of the Time Dragon. What we do know is that Hjalti Talos ascended the Ruby Throne and took the Cyrodiilic name Tiber Septim. The 424-year interregnum had finally ended, and Septim was destined to unite all Tamriel. He wouldn't be the first to claim to have unified Tamriel. The Riemann dynasty did as well, and the claim was as meaningless then as it would be this time. However, I won't deny that he achieved more than the Riemanns. The Riemanns failed to conquer Morrowind, and their idea of conquering Somerset was an agreement that avoided conflict, while forbidding Imperials from travelling to the Isles unless authorised. And in my opinion, Blackmarsh never has, and never will be conquered by any empire or dominion. Septim started his conquest with an advantage. His ambiguous origins made representing the interests of the Bretons and the Nords easier, and having served Cuhlakain, he already had the Colovian estates on his side. The Nords followed him after seeing his, or Wolfhalf's, use of the Storm Voice at Sancretor. The Bretons were trickier to subdue, but with the help of the Nords and the Witch Kings of the Reach, he quickly brought High Rock under his imperial wing. Hammerfell proved difficult to tame, as the Western warriors would not yield to foreign rule. However, the internal strife between crowns and forebears weakened the province. Civil war had almost broken Hammerfell, and the conservative crowns had fared better. So when the forebears aligned with the Empire, seeing an opportunity to have their leaders replace the old guard of the crowns, they pounced on it. Ultimately, Redguard rebellions allowed Hammerfell to maintain just enough of its sovereignty to not bring shame to their warrior culture. But the forebears had opened the door for the Imperials, and Tiber Septim was going to make himself at home. The subjugation of Elsweyr is another that seems conveniently absent from the records. One Imperial soldier named Atribus speaks of his involvement in the sack of Senchal, and claims that, after the Khajiit refused to surrender, the Imperials were commanded to slaughter every cat in the city. The Khajiit continued to resist, but they were inevitably sucked into the swirling vortex of imperial dominance. The Empire conquered the outer cities of Black Marsh, and attempts were made to civilize the swamps, but ultimately Black Marsh would never be domesticated by fleshy folk. At this point, Septim was at a crossroads. Invading Valenwood meant going to war with Somerset, for the two provinces had united under the Second Aldmeri Dominion. The alternative was to attempt what Riemann Cyrodiil and his sons had not been able to achieve, the conquest of Morrowind. Morrowind was the most mysterious of the Tamrielic provinces for Imperial strategists, as they'd never controlled any part of the Eastern Land to any extent. And despite his might, Septim was hesitant to go to war with a land ruled by a trio of living gods. However, the abundance of ebony in the region would provide the Empire with the resources needed to restore Cyrodiil to its former, pre-interregnum glory. Now, I believe the Empire would have failed miserably, were it not for one fortuitous turn of events. The Tribunal at full strength would have trounced Tiber Septim's armies, but Dagoth had stirred beneath Red Mountain, and his adversarial presence had prevented Almsavy from making their pilgrimages to the heart of Lorkhan. Thus, their powers were waning. If this fact became public knowledge, then Tiber Septim may not have come to the negotiating table at all. But both parties feared and respected each other. Tiber's army sacked Mournhold, the capital of Morrowind, but this wasn't enough to give the Imperials the confidence to further overwhelm the Dunmer. Even without the power of the Tribunal, the Dunmer were capable of giving the Empire a run for its money. Redoran warriors were among the best on Nirn, and few were as skilled in the arcane arts as the Telvanni. So, if you're Tiber Septim, and you're unaware of the Triune's waning powers, it's understandable that you would turn to diplomacy, even after taking Mournhold. What followed was the Armistice, the most significant turning point in the Tiber Wars. It was here that Tiber Septim was given the pieces needed to reconstruct a weapon of mass destruction. The terms of the Armistice suited both Tiber Septim's ambitions and the Tribunal's reputation. Morrowind did have to endure a figurehead king, chosen by the Empire, as well as an ongoing military presence to keep up appearances. There were other terms, but as far as the general Dunmer populace were concerned, these were the big ones. In exchange, the Dunmer were permitted to preserve their traditional laws and customs, including slavery, the Morag Tong, and the Great House societal structure. Despite the puppet king, Morrowind could largely operate as they had prior to the Armistice. This was a fairly easy pill for Morrowind to swallow. It avoided a great deal of bloodshed, and most importantly, Almsavy did not look weak in the eyes of the public. Tiber Septim gained a great deal from this arrangement. Firstly, he came off looking like the victor, forcing living gods to capitulate to his demands. And he could formally declare Morrowind as a part of his empire, a feat that hadn't been achieved by any man in thousands of years, not since High King Vraga of the Nordic Empire back in First Era 240. The key term of the Armistice was the secret one, the dismantling of the Numidium, transferring it into Septim's possession. This was a loss to the Tribunal, but the Armistice offered Morrowind protection from whatever Septim might do with the Brass Tower. With the aid of his trusted battle mage, Zurin Arctus, Septim reassembled the Numidium in the halls of Colossus, in Elsweyr. Arctus created a substitute for the Heart of Lorkhan to use in powering the automaton, a great green gem called the Mantella, the crux of transcendence. For more information on Arctus, Wolfhalf, and Septim's roles in this process, check out my Talos video. I'm going to avoid the Mantellan rabbit hole, at least for now, and the infamous Arcturian heresy, but in short, the Numidium was restored to working order. Perhaps Vivek, in giving the golem to Septim, didn't expect him to achieve this, but he did, through great ingenuity and/or treachery. And with this weapon, the Dominion would soon yield. While the Heartland had been caught in the endless turmoil of the Interregnum, the Second Aldmeri Dominion had flourished. The Dominion had reconstituted the Thalmor party to serve as the governing body of Valenwood. But the prosperity of the Second Dominion would be short-lived once Tiber Septim came into the picture. The Septim army swept away all of the Dominion's progress, conquering Valenwood, forcing the Ultima to retreat back across the sea to the safe haven of Somerset. This was a blow to the Aldmeri Dominion, but they could always count on their unrivaled prowess at sea and the tactical advantage of being an island nation. But we know what comes next. As the title of the video suggests, the Siege of Alinor and how Tiber Septim brought the Somerset Isles into the Empire in general is a nebulous topic. No doubt there was plenty of obfuscation on the part of the victors. Let's start with the most mainstream of historical sources available, the Pocket Guide to the Empire. The 3rd edition states, "The conquest and assimilation of Somerset into the Empire is remembered by many a living Ultima with horror, only partially diminished by time. Certainly, the pride of the people has never recovered." This is all the detail we get from the Pocket Guide, but it's ominous even from an Imperial perspective. No clear mention of how it was achieved. No mention of the weapons used in the process. Simply horror, followed by annexation. There's another text called On Morrowind, written by a High Elven scholar named Eramanwe of Sunhold, that goes into more detail about the hidden term of the Armistice and how it impacted Somerset. Nothing is known of the circumstances of the personal meeting between Septim and Vivec, or where it took place, or the preliminaries which must have preceded the treaty. The public reason was to protect the identities of the agents involved. In the east, rumours suggest that Vivec offered Numidium to aid in the conquest of the Ultima and Somerset Isle, in return for significant concessions to preserve self-rule, house traditions, and religious practices in Morrowind. Vivec had shown admirable restraint in not finding a use for the Numidium after acquiring it from the disappeared Dwemer. It seems the tribunal had agreed to keep its power dormant, and we'll explore why when we talk about the Numidium in detail. But for all his virtues, Vivec is not afraid to make sacrifices for his own self-interest. The celestial rock Bar Dao being a perfect example. He could have removed the looming threat from the city, but its presence was a warning to the populace that to abandon him is to assure your own doom. In his words, "I shall keep it there with its last intention intact, so that if the love of the people of this city for me ever disappears, so shall the power that holds back their destruction." Vivec knew well that it would be reckless to give this megalomaniacal imperial ruler the Numidium, but it was a priceless bargaining chip, and of all the people who would suffer from its activation, his Dunmer were not among them. The next canon source to mention the Siege of Alinor is the Arcturian heresy, in which the Underking states, "The Numidium, while not the god Tiber Septim and the Dwemer hoped for, the Underking was not exactly Lorcan after all. It does the job. After its work on Somerset Isle, a new threat appears." Another excruciatingly vague reference to its use against the High Elves. This text asserts a great deal more, including the fact that Tiber Septim allegedly wished to use the Numidium to conquer the world, as well as to kill the tribunal with it. But as I said earlier, the Arcturian heresy is an hour of discussion in and of itself, so we'll avoid it for now. This is where we delve into extra canon, Kirkbridean, Coda territory, but this first source has ties to in-game lore. Heimskir says the following in his sermon in front of Talos' shrine.
"But you were once man, aye, and as man you said, 'Let me show you the power of Talos Stormcrown, born of the north, where my breath is long winter. I breathe now in royalty and reshape this land which is mine. I do this for you, Red Legions, for I love you!'"
The reason this quote is relevant is because it legitimizes one of Michael Kirkbride's non-canon writings. Heimskir's words come from the text titled The Many-Headed Talos, and the sentence prior reads as follows. "And after the throne of Alinor did finally break at the feet of men, and news of it came to the Dragon Emperor in Cyrodiil, he gathered his captains and spoke to them, saying, 'You have suffered for me to win this throne, and I see how you hate jungle.' I can't confirm anything, but I believe the first part of this speech was removed in order to retcon the idea that Cyrodiil was once jungled. but it conveniently removes the part about Alinor as well. Also, the phrasing seems to suggest that Tiber Septim wasn't there during the siege. Whatever the case, we have a variety of sources now that support the idea that not only did Tiber Septim break the Ultima and conquer their unconquerable land, but he used the Numidium to do so. In regards to what's canon about Septim's conquest of the Isles, we only know that the Numidium was used, and that it is remembered by the High Elves with horror, even over 4 centuries later when the Pocket Guide 3rd edition was published. If we look beyond canon, into Kirkbride's extended writings, there are multiple references to the Numidium, and even directly to the Siege of Alinor. In one post, Kirkbride wrote, "The surrender of Alinor happened in 1 hour." And if that doesn't sum up the devastating power of the Brass God, nothing does. A region that stood resolute against constant seaborne aggression from the Slode and the Sea Elves. Not even the cultural god-hero of men, Riemann Cyrodiil, could take it by force. Yet the Numidium managed it in one twist of the dragon's time-bound tale. There's more to that quote of Kirkbride's, more to the consequences of unleashing the Prime Gestalt, with time warping ramifications. But we'll get to that when we delve into the nature of the Numidium. I'm not going to speculate on just how catastrophic the Siege of Alinor was, but the way I see it, for the Ultima to surrender in 1 hour, Septim either delivered total destruction or promised it. A peaceful surrender seems impossible though, especially with texts biased in favour of the Empire referring to unspeakable horrors. In the wake of Somerset's subjugation and Septim's success in officially uniting Tamriel under one empire, Tiber became a living legend. He had achieved what was thought impossible, and Septim wasn't done using the Numidium. He took it back to the mainland and stomped out any potential of prospective rebellions, largely in High Rock, where the leaders of the many feudal kingdoms had never taken kindly to imperial total control. The Mantella-revealed letters shed some light on Septim's post-unification deeds. Numidium was Tiber Septim's secret weapon in his bid for supreme power, a 1,000-foot-tall automaton, a golem or an atronach of sorts, powered by a gem called the Mantella, and with it, Septim crushed all who stood in his way. After the complete and total defeat of all his opponents, Septim began using Numidium to crush the neutral royal families of Tamriel, so that he could enthrone only persons he knew to be loyal. There is no doubt that Tiber Septim was a great man, but he went to such extreme lengths to secure his complete, unyielding authority over Tamriel. It's no wonder that he created enemies with long memories. His conquest was brutal, and it's impossible to know what more he might have done with the Numidium were it not for Zurin Arctus, the very man who had empowered the Brass God. The Mantella-revealed letters go on to say, his Imperial Battle Mage was furious at this use of his creation, and fought to reclaim the Mantella. In the ensuing battle, both the created and the creator were vanquished, the heart they shared blown out of this reality, into the netherworld they call Aetherius. Numidium's body was scattered throughout Tamriel, and the Imperial Battle Mage, without his life force, went into a semi-slumber in a subterranean vault. In the centuries that followed, the Emperor's elite soldiers, for generation after generation, collected the pieces of the Numidium and became known as the Blades. Tiber Septim's Imperial Battle Mage became known as the Underking, and set his forces out to find the Mantella. The Arcturian heresy penned by the Underking personally attests to this account. To continue an earlier quote from the Arcturian heresy, after its work on Somerset Isle, a new threat appears, a rotting undead wizard who controls the skies. He blows the Numidium apart, but it pounds him into the ground with its last flailings, leaving only a black splotch. The Mantella falls into the sea, seemingly forever. How did the Septim Empire get away with this? Well, it could be a variety of factors. After the domination of all dissidents, Tiber Septim was crowned again, this time as the first emperor of a unified Tamriel. Septim declared an end to the Second Era, what he called the Age of Chaos, and the Third Era began, the Golden Era. For almost 4 decades, Septim ruled a tamed and tranquil realm. Some say he breathed the secret syllable of royalty and changed the jungles of Cyrodiil into temperate meadowlands. He used his acquired wealth from his many interprovincial vassals and the rich sources of ebony from Morrowind to completely rebuild and fortify Cyrodiil and the Imperial City, restoring the Heartland's claim to the romantic title, the Starry Heart of Nirn. This period of peace, combined with an array of loyal Imperial chroniclers, writing the histories from the winner's perspective, and it's easy to forget the war crimes. At least, it is if you live close to the hub of the Empire. Far from the capital, the Emperor's enemies would await their opportunity to rise again. It should come as no surprise to anyone who has paid attention to history why the Thalmor and the Aldmeri Dominion as a whole loathe Talos worship, why they seem void-bent on tearing down the legacy of mankind. The Altmer endured almost 900 years of the Septim Empire, but when the Oblivion Crisis ended the dragon bloodline of Septim heirs and disrupted imperial dominance of Tamriel, the Aldmeri Dominion did not waste any time reforming. Tiber Septim and his prosperous empire got away with so much relentless ruination. The Great War and the determination of the Thalmor are direct consequences of all the terrors that Talos had carried out, only to sweep under the gold-trimmed rug. Nothing carried out thus far by the Third Aldmeri Dominion and the Thalmor comes close to the tyranny of Tiber Septim. Perhaps the Empire is finally paying for Septim's actions. There is a reason why the Numidium led to the downfall of the Dwemer race. There is a reason why the sagacious sovereign of the Clockwork City would not speak of it, and his fellow demigods did not galvanize it back to life for their own ambitions. The Numidium is not an overwhelmingly powerful automaton, like a dwarven centurion times 1008. It is a walking god. It transcends the material world. Every time it is used, the dragon is broken. It shakes the foundations of the Mundus, creating orbic shockwaves. Tiber Septim's leisurely use of the Numidium was inconceivably reckless, and there are many accounts of the desolation it left in its warpath. I'm going to bring this tale to a close for now, even though there is so much left to explore. I have stacks of texts, both licit and forbidden. I want to delve deep into the lore of the Walking Star, but this brass beast stood tall enough to knock the moons from the sky, and it deserves a dedicated video. Stay tuned in the coming weeks, for this is not the last you've heard from the Big Walker. It only gets more mind-bending from here. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. And if you'd like to support the content further, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. Please, only consider pledging if you can comfortably afford to. My name is Drew, you've been watching Drew Mora, and I'll see you in the next one.